Good morning, good day, and good evening. I'm, as always, your host, Brody Robertson. This is episode probably like 211. By the time you guys are seeing this, it's the middle of March. I've got a lot of backlogged episodes. Right now, for me, I think you're Friday, yeah?
Yeah, it's Friday.
Yeah,
Friday
so
afternoon.
it's the 16th of February for you. So,
Yep.
if we talk about specific things and you're like, why are they talking about something that happened a month ago? That's going to be why. Anyway, I'm Brody Robertson. Today we have Cassidy James Blade back on the show. How's it going? Welcome to the show.
It's going well. Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me back.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun last time. I thought it was a great episode. You had a lot of great things to say. And I guess we should talk about what the topic is today. Communication. So you told me about a talk that Alan Day did last year. I thought it was a really good talk after I saw it. I already wanted to do this beforehand anyway, but seeing that talk sort of set in stone that, yeah, we all know the way that we should be communicating, the way that we can hold better conversations. The issues is, like, actually implementing that and, just properly dealing with people. This is what I was saying beforehand, like, dealing with software, that's kind of the easy problem. People are the really hard part, especially across different cultures and languages and different communities and all of these different things.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Alan's talk is really good. And for context, if people haven't watched it, I'm sure there'll be links or whatever. But the gist is like, it's Alan Day is a designer. He's employed by Red Hat. He works on Gnome. He does a lot of really good design work within Gnome, and he's kind of the de facto, I would say, leader of the design team. There's not official titles or whatever, but he's been around for quite a while, and so he's done a lot of like mentorship on the design team. And he also served on the Gnome board of directors just a few years ago, I think. And so he's been around and he's seen these interactions. He's seen, conflicts. He's seen things be resolved. He's seen big changes on the Gnome desktop and how both the community and people internally have reacted to that. And so he shared a lot of his kind of experience from all of that and saying, here's how we can do better. Here's how we can resolve conflicts within the community. Here's how we can communicate better within the community. And he lays out a handful of things to keep in mind, which is it's really good. I recommend everybody, whether you work in open source or just are a fan of using open source, I recommend everybody watches it. It's really good.
Absolutely. I think the only problem is finding it because, it's... I don't know if they've clipped out that bit.
We talked about this last time.
Yeah,
so
we did.
Funny. Yeah,
we did. But I stand by what I said. I'm still right. And I know that there was another talk that did start doing it. Maybe it was Guadek. It wasn't Guadek this... Like... No, because Guadek hasn't happened again yet, hasn't it? What
no, yeah, it's in July. FOSDEM maybe?
Maybe
FOSDEM had
FOSDEM,
individual recordings up, which was nice. But
if they weren't doing it already, I'm taking credit for that.
Yeah. There you go. Well, what's funny with Guadek is, it's in July here in Denver, where I'm based, and I'm on the local organizing committee for it. And so I've actually just had a few calls with like AV teams who are going to do the streaming and recording. And that's one of our things that we set out from the beginning. We're like, we are going to have individually uploaded videos, whether it's, streamed on the day of, or at least just like soon after uploaded individually. Cause it's hard to link to like a timestamp of like 4 hours into the middle of a day. So, I feel a little bad. After our last chat, I actually started going through and chopping up a lot of the videos from Guadek, and I got like halfway or 3/4 of the way done, and then like I got COVID and like just didn't have the time to do the rest. So like they're chopped up sitting on my server. They just need to be uploaded. So maybe I can make that happen before this video goes live, and then we can link directly to it. That'd be nice.
Well, the one thing I do, we'll get into the actual point, but one issue I have with the timestamps is I noticed they don't work in embeds. So if I shared the stream on Mastodon, and it just started from the beginning. But if you go to
so
the
people
link,
are like, what?
It's
It's not the best experience. Yep, for sure.
So I don't know where to start because there's a lot that we can talk about. Because I've got my set of things to talk about. You got yours. If you want to go with yours first, we can just like direct around from there.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting talking about communication in free and open source projects. There's multiple aspects to it. There's communication within your project, which in some ways is easier because communities develop and they kind of naturally grow into certain norms. And so when you're within your project, you're kind of in the in group, right? Like there still absolutely can be conflict, and there still is, in probably every project. But like that's actually not the hardest part, in my opinion. And that's so like Alan's talk talks a lot about that internal communication, and that's I'd say that the most important thing that I found from that talk and just from my experience has been like face-to-face communication, if at all possible, whether that's in person or even like this video calls. Like that can be so powerful. Both again internal with your project, like if you can get people on a video call, if people are comfortable with it and have the bandwidth for it, or if you can meet up occasionally, even if it's once a year, once every couple of years, those experiences stick with you and they help reveal the humans behind the work, right? And so like internally, that's a huge thing. Externally, I think it's cool too. Like if you're collaborating with another open source project, or you want to chat to somebody, or maybe it's a newer contributor, like if you can find a way, if language and technology lets you do it, that face-to-face communication can be really powerful. That's one of the best takeaways I think I had from that, from Alan's talk specifically. But yeah, even
I was going to say, I think what makes internal communication a lot easier is, at least in a project, you will have a fundamental agreement on some core concepts. Like in Gnome, for example, nobody's going to argue we shouldn't use GTK, or we shouldn't, is like the mainly built in like C or C++? I'm actually not sure. What
built in C or C?
Like Gnome.
I mean, a lot of languages, but yes, I would say C is the de facto language for GNOME. But
no one's gonna argue like, oh, we should use like this instead. Like
rewrite it all in.
Yeah, rewrite it all
in
in
although
Rust.
you do get some people, you do get that, right?
Sure. Okay.
But
GTK is a good example. No one's gonna argue
like
it shouldn't be built in GTK.
Right. Right.
You have these like fundamental understandings. When someone is coming from outside of a project, or you're talking with someone, it's kind of hard to, especially if they're not laid out clearly, make those points understood. And oftentimes, someone will get involved in a project and maybe not agree with those fundamentals. And when that's the case, that's when you start to see some of this, I guess, pushback, maybe?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's, I feel like we talked about this last time too, but there's this, like, especially if you're a newer contributor, you come in and you have like some wild ideas. You're like, man, nobody's thought of this. Like, I'm just the right person. I have the right idea. Like, they need to rewrite it all in whatever, or they need to redesign everything and do this. Like, it's easy to, from an external perspective, have those ideas. Like, but oftentimes, like you said, the problem isn't necessarily the actual like technical thing. It's the people interactions, the community interactions, exactly. Like, or the stakeholders. Honestly, a lot of times you don't see the stakeholders that are involved in an open source project. So a good example is Gnome. Obviously, you think, I feel like it's a meme at this point that like, oh, Gnome is GTK, is Red Hat, is Fedora, is, it's all the same people or whatever, is Flatpak. Like you hear that,
in there
right?
somewhere.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, IBM's pulling all the puppet strings from the top, right? And like, that's not at all how it works. It's really cool that Red Hat employs a lot of people to work on, Fedora and GTK and Gnome and Flatpak and stuff. But like, they're not the ones pulling the strings. They are independent projects for a reason. Mm-hmm. There are stakeholders from companies like Purism and Endless OS, and I'm sure there's half a dozen others that I can't think of off the top of my head. I mean, Ubuntu, like, those are all stakeholders who have a vested interest in the project of Gnome. And like, it's also interesting to think like Gnome doesn't ship a product really. Like, and this is kind of changing with like, Gnome has an ecosystem. There's apps, there's a set of technologies, but like, there's not, there's a Gnome OS thing, which is like mostly for development, but Gnome is not the product itself that most users actually get. They get Ubuntu, or they get Fedora, or they get Red Hat, or they get whatever. And so you don't see the behind the scenes stakeholders who say like, Ubuntu says, oh, well, actually we're going to do this. And so we want it to work this way. And then Endless OS says, well, we want it to work this way. And then we've done research that says this. And so you end up with this end product. And so people go like, oh, the Gnome designers just did this and they didn't ask anybody. It's like, no, actually for like years behind the scenes, there were discussions and there were different stakeholder meetings and there was user research. And yeah, sometimes the thing that gets shipped is not like the perfect vision that the design team had or doesn't solve everybody's need perfectly, but it's because it is this collaboration between all these different stakeholders. And I think that's part of open source and like Linux in general that people don't really see often enough. So that's something to keep in mind, I guess, if you're commenting on a design decision or you're wondering why something happened a certain way in your favorite open source project, like there might be these stakeholders that they're funding the work. They're the ones who are paying developers to do the work, and they're not like secretly controlling the project, but obviously they're going to work on what makes sense for them. So yeah, it's just something interesting to keep in mind, I think.
I think you touched on something very important there. These conversations are happening publicly, like for the most part, without, obviously there are some cases where you're at like Guadec having a beer or something, and that's a bit different.
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
No one's recording that, hopefully.
Yeah.
But most of the conversation is going to be on like a public IRC, public matrix, depending on the project. It's going to be on a public mailing list. The issue is accessibility of that information. It's really, really difficult to go through 6 months of mailing lists to work out, like, a good example that I often like to talk about, I obviously being, like, I like to talk about Wayland a lot, like, there's a lot of decisions that happen in that project where there is, like, a 300 comment thread going over, like, all of these different stakeholders that have different reasons for wanting to do something, not wanting to do something, and what users often see, maybe they'll see a Phoronix article, and it'll be, like, one little excerpt, but you don't see all of that prior context.
You don't get the context.
Exactly, yes. And I feel like a lot of projects are really bad at communicating why something is being done.
Yeah.
They're very good at communicating what's being done, but the why is really difficult.
Yeah, this is one of the points I wanted to mention is like my recommendation for projects for their external communication, whether it's, again, to their users, to other projects, to press even, like blog about everything. And like a poorly written blog or like even just like a super technical blog is still better than no blog.
Yeah.
And yes, if you can have somebody who's good with words or whatever, write your blog posts, but like blogging gives you this, like, it lets you summarize all those big conversations. Like, you don't have to say, oh, just link to the pull request where there's 500 comments. You can say, okay, here's a thing that happened. Here are the arguments for and against or whatever. Here's why it ended up how it is. And that just like gives you a canonical place to link people to kind of to say, here's the stance, here's the thing. Like that's something I was really proud of, that we did a lot with Elementary, is like we did these monthly blog posts because we actually got feedback from the community that was like, people, especially when we're like really heads down working on a new release, they'd be like, oh, Elementary is not very active, they don't do anything. And it's like, no, we're just like, we're working our butts off, but we're working. Like, it's hard just to like talk about it out loud. So we made a point to do these monthly blog posts, and I think that helps a lot. I think it's similar to something that Gnome is doing now with like these weekly This Week in Gnome, thisweek.gnome.org, which is really cool. But yeah, those, like, as much as you can sort of put it out there and just say like, here's the thing, here's either the new feature or here's the decision or here's the new project or here's why we switched to this project or whatever it is, putting it out like as a blog post that can be linked to is super powerful. I think that's super helpful.
That's at you. I don't know if you realize like there's like a really good point you made there, but a lot of people have this weird perception of a project, and it's not just in the open source space. This is the case in like game development. Like if you see like a game on Indiegogo or something, if a project is silently working, people assume that nothing is getting done. But even if you're doing less work but blogging every single day, people have a completely different perception. Like, oh, it's improving really quick. Like, you could have by the end, like 6 months later, dead silence, a great product. But less progress, but blogging every day, people are going to have this different perception along the way.
Yeah, and obviously you can overdo it, right? Like you'd be like, oh, we're just like talking about nonsense or whatever. Like you want to make sure you're actually talking about real things that are happening, and not just future looking promises, whatever. But yeah, especially when there's like a decision that's made, or a change that's being made, or even like something that I think Tobias from Gnome, one of the designers on Gnome, does pretty well is like he'll put these blog posts out that they're not announcing a new thing that's like, here's the new thing, but it's like, hey, here's a problem we're looking at right now. Here's my wild out there idea of how we could solve it.
Yep.
And part of the reason for those blog posts is like to get people excited and get people thinking about it, both again internally and externally. And then that starts the gears turning, but it also helps that maybe in 5 years or whatever, if there's like this radical new window management. This is like the specific thing I'm thinking about. There's multiple examples of
Yeah,
this.
I know
like,
the window management.
There's some new
really cool.
radical new tiling thing or whatever that Gnome ships. Like, it's not going to just like come out of left field out of nowhere. It's like, no. You can see that we've been talking about this for a long time. Like, we had a blog post in like 2017 or something where we first started like literally sketching it out on a whiteboard. And then in 2021 or whatever, 2022, we had this blog post. Like, so it helps in that sense too, of not just announcing things that are new and out there, but also discussing the process a bit and discussing, kind of giving a peek behind the curtain a little bit.
Yeah.
So much of what we do in open source, I think, it's weird. It's like, it's out there, it's public, it's on public issue trackers, which is good and bad for different things, for different kinds of conversations or whatever. But also there's so much information that it's hard to like follow a concise timeline or a concise idea through from the initial thought to the final execution. So again, I say like blog about everything. That's just, I think that's a huge benefit. And just another kind of anecdote from this is on the Flatpak side, or FlatHub specifically. FlatHub didn't have a blog until like a couple months ago, I think. And so announcements were like posted onto a discourse category that was like an announcements category, which is fine. Like, that's better than nothing. But it was just kind of like there wasn't a good cadence. There wasn't a real, like, a normal update schedule. Even when it was like, hey, here's our yearly State of the Union sort of a thing, it just wasn't super visible. And so something that the FlatHub admins did recently, which is really awesome, is they set up like a documentation site that also includes a blog. And that's awesome. Like, now we have a place where you can just like throw either short announcements or even longer form content. When we announced we were going to be at FOSDEM, we put it on the blog. Like, that helps so much. Like, not having that meant that people just didn't have any visibility into what FlatHub was doing. Now that it's there, it gives us a place to put that information, to say, here's what we're working on, here's the challenges we're seeing, here's what's coming next.
I want to give a lot of props to both System 76 with Cosmic on this, and also the GIMP project, because they do GIMP's especially a good example, because there's the whole meme about GIMP 3 is never gonna happen. They keep I think the date's supposed to be Q1. We're getting close to the end of that, so I don't think that's gonna happen.
Yep.
I think they're supposed to be in like 299 or something right now. I'm sure they'll get it done eventually, but it's taken a while. But even though it's taken a while, they've brought these blog posts out. They've brought these like yearly reviews out and indicated like, this is what we're doing. This is what's still left to do. Here's the current state of the GTK3 port. Here's all of these different things. And then in Cosmic's case, they do, I want to say, their monthly update. Yeah, monthly updates where they're like, hey, we implemented wallpaper selection. Like, it's nothing that exciting. It's just like, here it is.
But you can see the progress.
Yeah, exactly. Or it's like, here's like, I don't know, we have tiling in this way. Like, all of these basic things, just giving you an idea. Because all that stuff, as you said, is there on the issue tracker. But it's just hard to find. It's not easily accessible. That's the problem.
Yeah. Making your projects information easily accessible is hugely important. I mean, that's both the information about what you're working on, or if you make a new release, like having a good write-up of all of the new features in a way that's written that like somebody can easily digest. And it's funny, with both Elementary and Gnome and other projects I've worked on and contributed to, like, one of the things you do with release notes or like a release blog is you kind of look at like everything that's in the release, and it's just like, it's a grab bag, right? Like, there's so much, especially with something as huge as Gnome. Like, there's so many people working on so many different pieces. Yeah. And so you look at what actually has been done, and then you kind of reverse engineer a story. So it's like, it's funny because it's then when you actually share that story, it sounds very put together and very intentional from the start. And like, a lot of times it's not, but you're taking that and making it easily digestible into a story. So a lot of times I say, like, pick like 3 main topics that you can kind of bucket all of the changes and improvements into. And of course you can always say, and more, and then include some other stuff. But like, if you had a bunch of different projects that all worked on specific things that improve security, then you can say, okay, security was a focus of this release, and here's all the things about security. If you want to say like user customization, like maybe there's a bunch of different things that have to do with user preferences or user customization, then you can bubble that up to the top and say like that's the other, the second main point.
Yep.
So you kind of like distill all this chaos, and it is chaotic, like, but you distill all that chaos into some common themes, and then you repeat them, and you list them at the top, you repeat them again and again and again. And the nice side effect of that is like that's also the like perception both of like end users and press when they cover your topic or your project and your release, like they'll hit those main topics. And that's nice because as a project it lets you kind of dictate the I don't want to say like dictate the coverage exactly, because you're like obviously a press should do their job and like
I guess
fact check this stuff, but like it lets you kind of
story.
set the story. Yeah, like tell the story and set the, there's a word that I can't think of, but lets you start the conversation.
Sure. Yeah.
And then,
yeah.
And and I think that's super powerful, and that's something that like too many projects don't do. They'll say like, here's a massive list of all the changes, and it's just like, yep, it had a lot of changes, cool, and it's like too much to comprehend. But if you can kind of group them together in a way, and it helps a lot.
I don't want to take away from there is value there for technical release notes. Absolutely. If you want to know
for sure.
specifically what was changed, and for some users that actually is incredibly valuable. But yeah, I do think especially for those who are not super, like, most people are not doing what I'm doing, where I'm sitting there reading hours of mailing lists and issue trackers. Like, most people don't have a super technical understanding of what's going on.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I use Gnome. I don't know, Gnome. You like the application overview thing, whatever. Like, there's just, and it's like, oh, if something changed, like, oh, we've changed the way that applications are being sorted, or they're being indexed in a different way to make them load quicker, things like that. Like, you don't need to know the exact algorithm that's being used and how that's all going. That's
like, if you can link off to that, that's great. But yeah, you need to like take a step back and make it a little bit more high level. Yeah.
I think that's
especially when it's like that a huge release, like like an OS version release or a GNOME version release. Like, sure, like if you have like your release notes for your specific component or whatever, like you can get technical in those. Like that the people reading that are going to care more about the technical stuff. But like if it's like a big version update, like you can't get into the weeds too much on that announcement. Of course, again, link off to the whole big list of all the changes or whatever, but like you need to craft a story around it. You need to like summarize it, pick some main topics, and kind of work that into a story.
A great example of not doing this is, are you aware that in GNU grep, fgrep is deprecated?
No.
It's been deprecated for 16 years.
Cool. I couldn't tell you.
No one knows.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Because they've had discussions of the mailing list. They've talked about like deprecating it. They've gone from like deprecated to like the next level of deprecated, and then like they've shifted it around. But nobody knew. I did a video on this because I thought it was so funny. But nobody was aware that it's deprecated, and they keep using it in scripts. Like, there are scripts on your distro right now that are probably using egrep. Yeah. It's both egrep and fgrep. They want to swap it to you only use GNU grep-e, grep-f instead. But yeah, things like that.
Yeah, it's like if you've made a big, especially like a breaking change or a deprecation or something that's like going to change how people use your project. Yeah, for sure. It's like you need to make that a little bit more out there and like obvious. You can't just rely on like error messages or or whatever, that's funny. Another point I wanted to share too is like thinking about this kind of this blogging and working with press, whether that's YouTubers or tech press or Linux press or whatever, or big press, whatever. You like, as an open source project, if at all possible, like put together a press kit that's it can just be whatever your high quality or vector logos, like high quality screenshots or screen recordings, like anything you would want put in a blog post or an article about your project or your release, put that in a zip file or some sort of a like press kit, what I like to do, I've seen, I think FlatHub does this, and I think Elementary does this still too, is like they have it on a GitHub repo, and there's like GitHub has the download project as a zip, and so you can just link to that direct zip link, and then if you update your screenshots or whatever, the next time somebody clicks that link, they'll get the right thing.
I
But
didn't
like
know FlatHub
make
had a
it,
press kit.
yeah, no, this is so we. I think like 2 days ago it was merged. We linked to it on the about page now because it was there and nobody, including me, knew about it.
People, because every time I
Yeah.
talk about FlatHub, someone's like, "Rudy, you used the old logo. You used the wrong
Yeah,
logo." It's like,
yeah. Yep.
okay, where's the right? I know, like usually now I just go to the website, I get the what do you call it, the favicon, and just make it bigger because at least that's the right icon.
Especially if it's like an SVG and it's like it's scalable, it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. So we had this press kit for FlatHub, and like it was actually when we announced the over 1 million active users, 1.6 billion downloads, what like all that crazy stuff. There was a blog post that used like the old logo. And then they like messaged me on Mastodon and they're like, "Hey, by the way, where can I find a high quality version of the logo?" And I was like, "That's a great question. I have no idea." And I started looking into it, and it's like we had a repo on GitHub that's like, here's the press kit, here's all the logos, here's some other assets, but it wasn't linked to from the FlatHub website. So we added it. It's on the about page now.
Let's see. Does Gnome have?
I think I think I saw that PR merged anyway. There's at least an open PR, but I think it was merged.
If Gnome has one, I can't find that either.
Yeah, there's brand.gnome.org, which has some things, but I don't. Yeah, again, I don't know how well that's linked to.
It seems like whatever SEO they have for it isn't doing super well with the search engine though.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, maybe we need to put more information like press kit, logos, GNOME branding.
I don't know SEO whatsoever. All I know is if I search for GNOME press kit, it doesn't show up. So
yeah, that's funny.
I don't know if you can hear the noise outside. My roommate's nephew's here, so if you hear a toddler screaming, that's why.
No worries. Yeah, I haven't heard it yet. Also, if you hear a toddler screaming here, I have a 4-year-old. So
yeah, that's fair.
So I think they maybe went to go get groceries or something. I think they left, but with my wife, not just the 4-year-old. Yeah, the 4-year-old's just out roaming the town. It's fine.
So
yeah, okay. So it says graphics and flathub.org/about. Then there's a section there. It says press information, and graphics and logos can be found here, and it links to the GitHub repo. So yeah, that was merged within the last couple of days. So
okay.
Because we just had an instance of that of like, oh, whoops, there's not good information here.
Okay, yeah, awesome.
Yeah, that's definitely like a suggestion I have for any project though, is like if you even if it's not much, even if it's just your logo, even if it's just like your logo and maybe a couple screenshots of your latest release, whatever it is, but if you can make it easily digestible by somebody who's going to make a YouTube video about it, or somebody who's writing a blog post or a news article or whatever, that's just going to help your communication with the outside world too. Have a consistent voice, have a consistent image, which I think can be nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know. Did we talk about this when we were actually live or before that? You talked about being able to have like face-to-face discussions. I remember we were already recording when we started that. Text is a really like interesting one because it's really useful, and you can have very technical discussions with it. But the issue is oftentimes it ends up leading, especially if you're not being super clear, and sometimes it's hard to be super clear. It can lead to people misinterpreting what you're saying, and
100%.
Especially if there's like, you're not being completely positive about a project. You want something changed.
Yes. Yeah.
Depending on how you phrase it, different people may interpret that in different ways. Like if you're being very straight to the point, this is a thing that a lot of people in Australia do. Like, we'll be very straight to the point, absolute no nonsense about it. Some people find that, exactly. Some people find that really rude.
Yeah. This is a great point. I had like a couple of notes about this. Text, again, it's really nice in a lot of ways because especially if it's different cultures, different languages, like it lets you do it asynchronously. I mean, of course you can have like real-time chat, but like if you're doing, social media or Reddit or whatever, like text is really powerful in that way because it gives you time to like think, process, translate or whatever, rephrase things. But yeah, it can lead like I think as somebody who reads text, your default is to just assume everybody has the same frame of reference as you.
Yeah.
And so that's, you think like, ah, if somebody in my culture, the way I talk, said this, I would get offended because, they didn't sugarcoat it or whatever. Whereas like if you're talking to somebody and it's like, no, our culture is like we just don't sugarcoat. We're straight to the point. We're, brutally honest or whatever. And like that could create a clash when you don't really see. I mean, as silly as it is, it's like you hear somebody with a different accent than your own, and like that in your brain, that tells you something, right? That says, oh, there may be a cultural difference here, even if we're speaking the same language. There may be a cultural difference. Or you're talking to someone who doesn't look like you. You're talking to somebody who I think that in-person thing just communicates so much more information about the other person, and like facial expressions and everything. Like when you inflection, just all of that stuff that you don't get in text, I think can put a lot more meaning. And of course, you can still have misunderstandings in person, like that still happens. But I think the they're a lot less common when we can talk in person. Um, I have a fun example I think I always talk about is my first Guadec that I went to. I talked about this last time we were on too, but there was somebody who like it was pretty, I don't want to say blunt. I don't know if that's the right word, but just like to the point in our communications online. And I'd only ever talked online. And like, so some people in the community didn't really like them or whatever. And then like met them in person. And I was like, oh, this is like one of the friendliest, nicest people I've ever met. Like genuinely nicest people ever.
Mm-hmm.
And so that like, it's just a totally different thing when you're just like some rando on a blog or on an issue report versus talking face to face.
I think what the way that I would like to see people approach things is just if you're going to have a conversation like this, assume the person you're talking to has the best intentions. Like there obviously comes a point where someone is clearly being a bad actor. Like they are not trying to have a good conversation here. They are trying to roll you up. Look, I'm at fault for that sometimes. I'm not going to say that I'm never at fault for that. But if you go into these conversations with the best intentions, assuming the person is trying to make progress here, like I think this is especially true in a project where it's like a meta project like Wayland, where you don't have one set of goals. You have all of these different individuals from all of these different desktops that have all of their own separate design guidelines and like UX experiences they want, where you'll often see there's like clashes about super basic things. Like my favorite example right now is whether a application window should be able to set its icon and the children window should be able to set different icons from the parent. And this is such a basic thing, but it's led to so much discussion. And I noticed that when FOSSDom happened, Matthias, Matthias Klump, the guy who's started the issue, he was like, yeah, so we actually resolved like a bunch of these issues by just talking.
Yeah. It's amazing how that happens, right? Like, and that's why I think the in-person conferences and meetups are so powerful. It's like people are energized when they go to them. They're excited to like do something new and interesting. They're excited to see people face to face. They get in a room, they realize that we're all on the same team. We're all friendly. It's a combination of both doing like work and doing social and going out and getting a beer or whatever. It's like, it's this really productive environment where you can just say, you know what? Okay, yeah, actually, like we might disagree about this thing, but like we agree that this is dumb to like hold up this project. Like let's just work on what we can together.
Yep.
I like to say that a lot. Like even when you have projects that are competing in open source, you have cooperation is what I love to call it. Like you're cooperating together when it makes sense, and you're competing on what you think is the best vision for a thing. And like that's I think when open source is the most healthy, is when you are working together as much as you can. When you're even when you have differences of opinions or differences of vision, work together on the things that overlap. Like even if you're not literally using the same code, like you a lot of times are solving the same problems. There's so many random examples, but like elementary and Gnome is a good example of this. Of like elementary is a downstream of Gnome, a lot of Gnome technologies, but doesn't use like Gnome shell. It uses GTK, but doesn't use Adwaita. And so there's overlap in approaches to things, even if it's not the same code. Like Gnome shell learns from Gala, and Gala learns from Gnome shell, and like I think that's really healthy. And you can have those. You can say, hey, when we were solving this from a design perspective, like here's why we did it this way, and that might inform the other project, and that might make it better. They might have something interesting that informs how you do yours. And so I think that like that collaborating, even when you're not shipping the same thing, like even when you're not saying we're gonna write the same code base and both contribute to the same code base, it still is super super valuable to talk and to learn from each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I think where communication tends to break down, obviously there's a lot of other points, but the point where I think most people should probably agree it's just off the table is when you start bringing in personal insults. Like
Yeah.
that just is there is never a time where insulting someone's, like, okay, maybe there's a time where insulting someone's code works, but insulting like, you know, I don't know, the state of their project, other things going on in the project, whether they should even be involved, like all of these things just, they do not help in any situation. If that's the route you're going, like you have to be prepared to just like end the conversation. Or like if your goal is just to remove someone from a project, like sure, whatever, but you're not going to have a productive discussion after this point.
Yeah. I think it's hard because it's a lot of times it's hard to understand and realize like what is personal.
Right.
I think a lot of people, especially in open source, especially when it's your like passion project, your pet project, like you feel very personally. Like it's if somebody says that your code is bad, it is easy as a person who wrote the code to say they are saying I am bad.
Right.
Or if somebody says that, you know, your design, this design is ugly or I don't like it or whatever, it's really easy to take that personally.
Yeah.
And so that's I think the flip side of it is like, yeah, obviously you can't, like, personal attacks are dumb. Like don't I mean, attacks are dumb in general, but you don't talk about the person themselves.
Like bring up someone's family, keep it focused for example, on things like that.
Yeah, or like, yeah, it's like keep it focused on the product. And I mean, when it's hard because again, like if you're talking about the governance of a project, it's like that's not necessarily personal, but it could be an interpersonal conflict or something.
Right,
like
it might refer to like someone in leadership. Yeah,
so it's hard to kind of draw the line, I think, but yeah, I would say generally, like, yeah, if you're going to critique something, if you're going to talk about something, if you're going to criticize something, like keeping it focused on the objective like product itself, I think is important. And then on the flip side, as somebody who, if you're receiving critique or receiving criticism or receiving commentary, just anything, like try to not take it too personally too. Like this person who's critiquing and or criticizing it is sharing their experience of like why they don't like this thing. They're not saying if they're saying you are bad and you should feel bad, then whatever. But like generally they're not. Like usually they're not. Yeah.
This is a problem that I'm sure it occurs in like open source as well. People tie up a lot of personal self-worth. That's what I'm trying to say. They type a lot of self-worth in the work they are doing. This happens with YouTubers especially. Like they'll make some great video or video they think is great, and it gets, you know, on YouTube has this great mental health edition where it shows you the ranking of each of your videos 1 to 10 in the last 10 videos, and you upload a video, you wake up and it's like 10 out of 10, worst video of the period.
Oh no. Yeah, that doesn't seem like the best.
You can hide it now,
that's hard.
Which is nice, but
that is good. But yeah, sometimes you do have to disconnect a little bit from like, okay, you know, I did this thing and I did it and I like it and I think it's good and it solves my needs or whatever, but people didn't like it. And it shouldn't be personal, but it's really hard to not make it personal when when you have so much self-worth or self just interest in it. Yeah, it can be hard. And I think, again, if you're providing criticism or critique, I think that's something to remember too, is like, even if you're just critiquing or criticizing the thing, like, you know, the product, like, even if you keep it just focused on the product, like it will be taken personally to an extent. And that's, you know, you can't necessarily avoid that. And I think that's important to remember from both sides.
From the side of being critical, this is something I've certainly experienced firsthand. People will provide something that they feel is constructive criticism, and that's great.
Hmm.
please go ahead and do so. But the issue is when someone feels like they're giving constructive criticism and then you don't feel that that is useful criticism, or you don't think like maybe it's well argued, it's well like everything about it is well intentioned. But
Hmm.
say for example like Gnome, like if you give a completely well reasoned argument why like a system tray is a good idea and why upstream should have a system tray, it's absolutely great. There's not like any fault in the logic there. Just because the project doesn't think that that is a good idea doesn't mean the project is against constructive criticism. Like they just
Yeah,
might.
yeah, yeah,
Something I've started saying recently is even if you're giving constructive criticism, that doesn't mean it has to be accepted. You might be
yeah.
trying to construct something different.
That's a good point. Yeah, yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's something, especially thinking from the gnome perspective. Like, there's this, I don't know, there's this, I don't want to say meme, I don't know, mentality, I
Well,
guess, of like,
correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's fair to say that Gnome has like they have a design vision, and that's the
yeah,
vision they are aiming towards. Like their goal isn't to be like, you configure every little aspect of the
right,
desktop.
yeah,
There's obviously a lot of configuration you can do, but it's not like you're going to control everything. They've got this vision they want to aim towards, and that's where they are going. And that's
yeah,
they think that's a good idea. And that's great.
yeah,
I
yeah,
want
yeah.
to see someone do that because it seems like it's going well for them.
Where did I just saw, I think it was on Mastodon, there was an interesting discussion. Now I'm trying to think of who it was. Is it Nate from KDE? Is that,
Nate Graham?
I'll have
Yeah.
to, I
Is a
think,
blog?
but there was just a post on Mastodon that was really interesting,
Mhm.
talking about like kind of the difference between KDE and GNOME,
Mhm.
and it was from somebody who works on KDE and contributes to KDE, and it was like, I thought it was a really good perspective of, KDE does it this way, and we often will not say no. We'll often be like, yeah, sure, your weird use case, yeah, great, we'll support that. Like, and that means that it can be really adaptable to whoever, to where you can build your own experience out of it, which is really cool. And I think there's value to that existing. And then on the GNOME side, GNOME designers and GNOME contributors say no a lot more, and
Curated.
people
That's what I
hear
was thinking
that.
of before. Curated is
Yeah,
what
it's like
Gnome is.
people hear that no, and they're like, oh, they don't listen to feedback, and it's like, no, that's not what that is. They listen to feedback, and they just don't agree that's what they want to build, and that's okay. Like, that's that's how you build a cohesive, opinionated experience or project. And there's positives and negatives. Like, um, yeah, that post. I'll try to find it after the fact, and we maybe can link to it. But I thought it was a really really good kind of comparison of just the different approaches and what effect that has. And it doesn't mean one is better or worse. It just is, they're just different. And I am on this of the opinion that if I'm going to build a product, I want it to be opinionated and have a specific vision, and so that I'm attracted to the gnome kind of philosophy because of that. And but some people aren't, and that's fine. And maybe
Don't.
that's a case of like, maybe as a project, that's something, that approach to things is something you need to make more well communicated too, and just say, hey, we accept bug reports, we accept feedback, but we do have a specific vision in mind. And it's also not as like top down as some people think. There isn't just like three designers who make all the decisions or whatever. Like,
There are three designers that are very vocal on social media, and that's why people have that perception.
yeah, yeah, sure, but it's like I was saying before, with all the different stakeholders, like there's these things can be years long processes where we're talking to different projects and different, even within GNOME itself, there's maintainers of specific components, and there's like the GTK developers, and like it's not just like whatever the design team wants happens. In some ways, as a contributor to the design team, I wish that was the case, but it's not how it actually works. But I do think, yeah, if you can communicate that as a project up front, like what your approach to design is, what your approach to suggestions and feedback is, it doesn't mean you're not listening to those suggestions and feedback. That all of that feedback does play into the design decisions that are made. But it doesn't mean that if you say, I think this should be a feature, that they're gonna be like, yeah, sure, yeah, no problem. Like that might be like, but how's that gonna work with this other feature we're working on? Like, yeah, there's just a
Yeah.
whole philosophy behind how a product is designed. So
I'm sure you've heard things like, I hate this statement. I wish it would go away. Like, Linux is about choice. Like, no, Linux is about freedom. Like, stop it. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't know at what point in the history of like the free software movement that it shifted from freedom being, you're able to modify the code. You have
yeah,
like you all the four freedoms, all that. To you have the freedom to do whatever you want with the application. Like, it's flipped upside down, where it's like somebody.
yeah.
The work has to be done, but the work's not getting done. It's like, so if you want the freedom to modify things, someone needs to add that to the project. But if no one's adding it to the project, then obviously you don't have that ability to do it.
Yeah, I think the freedom goes both ways, right? Like, as a developer of an application, you have the freedom to develop it how you want. Like, and if people don't like it and don't agree, they can fork it. I mean, that can be an abrasive way to say things like, you can fork it or patches welcome or whatever. But that really is part of the beauty of open source, is like, you can't, just because it's open source doesn't mean you have to do everything for everybody. Like, you can say as a project, this is what I want. Like, I maintain a couple of just really dumb little apps on FlatHub, right? And like, I get people that come to me and they're like, this is great, but I wish it did this other thing too. And I'm like, yeah, I'm just not, I don't have time. I'm not really interested. That wasn't the problem I was trying to solve. That doesn't mean like your idea is bad. That just means I don't want to do it. And that's like, the code is there. It's open. It's under a GPL license. Like, you can take it and do it and adapt it, and that's awesome. And that's the power of open source and the freedom of open source, is that you, as an end user, as somebody who gets the application and the thing, like, you can get the source code that made it, and that's unique and powerful, and something you don't get on proprietary mainstream platforms. Like, but that doesn't mean that you, as a user of open source, are entitled to every feature that you possibly want being implemented and maintained in perpetuity by somebody else. Like, so yeah, I think it can go both ways, and yeah, it's hard. And again, it's a communication thing too, of like,
yeah, that's what I was about to get into.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
I was gonna say, I don't want to call out specific names, but we both know that there are people in the Gnome project that do this. There are people there's definitely going to be, I don't have names off the top of my head, but there are people in the KDE project that do this as well, who are like very, how would I say it? Are not how do I say this without specifically mentioning people?
Not delicate? Not...
Yeah, who are very...
Yeah.
This goes back to what we're saying. They're like straight to the point, and like,
yeah.
I don't care that you think this is wrong. Like, I don't care that this is the way that you don't want...
Yeah.
Go use something else. Like, we are not here to serve your specific like the way they approach it just is like, I don't know if it's intentionally inflammatory or it's just bad at communicating through text, or because I'm sure these people are great in person, but there are certain people who are like they get harassed a lot for it, because like, people feel like their criticism isn't being heard. And this is what you were saying before, like, this is like a two-way thing. Like, you need to, like, if you want people to understand what you're doing, you need to explain the why and not just the what. And people from outside the project need to be able to, like, understand what's going on there. And I think ultimately, the ultimate thing here is just don't use projects that don't align with what you want to do, and that will solve all your problems. Yeah. But,
right, yeah.
that's not always that easy.
Yeah, I would say I've definitely seen in, again, multiple projects at multiple companies, whatever, like, there's a difference between being a good developer or a good maintainer or whatever and being a good communicator. And
yes,
I think those are, if you have both of those skills, that's amazing, and you're a unicorn in some ways. But in the age of social media, it's very easy, if you are the maintainer of a project, to go out there and say something and it to be maybe accurate but abrasive. And as an open source project, this is something about Gnome that people don't understand. Like, Gnome is not a company. Like, Gnome can't fire people. I mean, no. So there's the Gnome Foundation, which is an organization that has a handful of employees that like manage the legal side of things. But like, the people developing your favorite Gnome app or whatever feature are generally not employed by the Gnome Foundation or Gnome itself, as a company. And so
To be fair, you could get banned
it's
from the GitLab if you were abrasive enough.
right, but it's like, okay, if they're saying things that are, abrasive on social media, that's a bummer, and we can, there's a code of conduct committee, and like if they're actually violating the code of conduct. But a lot of times the being abrasive is not against the code of conduct, like being a jerk, if it's not targeting individuals and harassing people, like being mean in itself is not strictly against the code of conduct, if that makes sense. Which, like, and also there's so many social media platforms and so many people in the Gnome that contribute to Gnome that, like, you can't possibly like laser eye monitor everything that everybody says on social media, and you're like, we wouldn't want to. But it just means, like, sometimes you'll have somebody with either whether it's an ego thing or just they just have an abrasive personality, or I like to tell people, like, they're so tired. Like, maintainers of open source, doesn't matter who it is, like, maintainers are so tired and burnt out that, like, sometimes your BS threshold is just really low. Like,
Yeah.
like, so you just will, like, call somebody out about something on social media, and from the outside, if you're like, see, gnome people mean, and it's like, yeah, okay, yes.
We don't just have to bring up Gnome.
Should that person have said that?
I'm sure the same thing is
Maybe
true with
not.
like Linus. Like Linus has
100%.
thousands of people that are trying to talk to him every single day. And when he just like when he has like an email, it's like, no, this is wrong, you're stupid, this is wrong, stop it, stop it, stop it. And, like, I get it. It makes sense.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
It's totally understandable why he just seemingly randomly just explodes on people on the mailing list.
Right. Yeah. It's like, okay, there's been other conversations. There's been other, like, they've been doing this for a long time. They're tired. They're burnt out. They're whatever. And so it's hard. You want to balance the, like, okay, it's really powerful to have your contributors of open source projects be out there sharing what they're working on to social media. That's great for your project, but also, like, rein it in sometimes. I think, like, yeah, maybe it's not a good idea to be out there and saying, like, I hate people that comment this on bug trackers. It's like, yeah, okay, I understand that that's your opinion and that's how you feel, but, like, people are going to see that. They're going to see it out of context. It's going to either like reinforce their existing idea of gnome people bad, or whatever project is mean, or whatever, even if you're not being, like, actually abusive or actually, super inflammatory. It's just it's hard because the more visibility you have into the maintainers and how things work, like, the less of a filter there is, and it can reinforce stereotypes and opinions, I think. But on the flip side, you can't really, like, control that. If you're a company, you totally can. You can be like,
sure.
hey, if you're posting about our product on social media, like, you need to stick to the talking points or whatever. And in open source, you don't always get that, and it's a positive and a negative, I think.
I don't remember which social media platform was experimenting with it, but I thought it was a really good idea where they'd use some, like, magical AI language model stuff, and if the post got flagged as, like, potentially controversial, there'd be, like, a timer before it would get posted. So it'd be like 10 seconds, 20 seconds, whatever. And it's like, if you have, like, it's really easy to post something. You like, read something really inflammatory. It's like, I don't know, this specific GNOME developer, you're a bad person or whatever. And you want to, like, fight back straight away. And it's very easy to write something, just post it. But if there is that delay there, if there is, like, if you take 5 minutes, take a walk outside, come back in, you're like, wait, do I actually, like, is there anything productive that's going to happen from trying to fight with this person on the internet? And the answer in almost every case is no. There are some cases, sure, but most of the time, if it's just some random, like, anonymous account, no, probably not.
Yeah. That's the XKCD of, like, somebody on the internet is wrong or whatever. Like, it's like, you know what? Sometimes it is not worth your time and energy to try and correct everything. Like, I get pulled into this too. Like, I do it too, of, like, somebody will say something and it's wrong, or they are missing context, and I'm like, I really want to correct them. And it's hard not to when you're like, no, maybe I can change their mind. 99% of the time, you're not going to change their mind. You're just going to tick them off, and you're going to create an argument out of something that was just a random post.
Yeah.
And you're going to raise the visibility of that argument which is just going to reinforce people's existing opinions about something.
I think there are cases
it's
where
hard.
people,
Yeah.
it's weird, right? Because there are people that are looking for a conversation, and there are people looking to argue, and
Yeah.
because you can have some great conversations about whatever topic it happens to be. And if someone is willing to come to the table and look at what you're saying and empathize with your position and where you're coming from, you can actually, like, even through text, I've had some great conversations before, but identifying what that is, especially through text, versus someone who is specifically saying something to rile you up, like, oftentimes the difference between those two are very subtle.
Yeah, sometimes people just want to have an argument, and like if you're gonna feed into that, you're just burning your own energy, and you're probably not making yourself or your project look good. Like even if you're right, like the fact that you're engaging in an argument in public on social media just looks bad.
Yeah.
Even if you're right, even if you're like 100% right, and I've had to tell people this too. Like there is, oh man, I don't want to call out the specific project, but I'm trying to even remember what it was. There was an open source project. So I remember now. But yeah, it's something that I like and I've used, and like I think technically the project is very interesting. And they have a habit of like causing drama or causing just like refuting anything.
You're
And like
being
overblowing.
very generic here. I can think of like 20 different projects this would apply to.
Right, which is why I'm
Good
trying
job.
to make it generic to be like maybe you can think of an example.
You worked it out.
Like maybe you can think of an example of sometime this has happened in your own project, or whatever, whoever's listening to this. But like the fact that they were engaging in these arguments, even though I think technically they were correct, but the fact that they were engaging in these arguments made the project look bad to me, and I was like, ooh, I don't know. Like, so that's I think that's hard to remember. Of like, it's like if you were going to go out on the street and you were going to like start shouting at somebody outside of their workplace, right? And like, or if somebody came to your workplace and they were like shouting at you from the street, it's like, okay, if you just ignore that, they're just the crazy person on the street shouting at the building, right? But if you come out of the building and you stand there in the street and you shout back at them, like you both just look like idiots. Like even if you're right, even if that person is totally in the wrong and they're shouting at you and they're crazy and you have every factual point and you can counterpoint everything that they're saying, you still look like two people yelling at each other on the street. And I think the social media is the same way of like, sometimes just getting in a public argument's not worth it. Like that's when you can take it. You can take it privately. You can say, hey, I saw this post of yours. I thought that was interesting. If you wanted to discuss it or learn a little bit more, like I'm happy to talk to you about it. But like, trying to like one up each other on social media or just like prove you're right on social media publicly. I just don't think it ever looks good.
Well, what it does is it tries to score points with the people who already agree with you. Like
yeah.
You're like, let's just say there's like an argument between like a Gnome and KDE developer. The Gnome dev is arguing for this curated experience. The KDE dev is arguing for customizability. Like, no one is going to come out of that and be like, hey, I was a supporter of GNOME. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I actually think that being able to customize is a good idea. Like, no, what's going to happen is the people who support GNOME, they're going to be like, yeah, GNOME's right. The people who support KDE, they're like, yeah, KDE's right. I'm going to be on the outside eating my popcorn and having fun laughing at both of you. And that's, I think, is where most people are going to be.
Yeah, a lot of people are gonna be like, "Wow, these open source projects, like, wow, they just like to argue a lot. I can't believe that they just yell at each other in public." Like, yeah, you're not doing yourself any favor there. Yeah, and it's hard because it kind of goes back to the issue tracker, like, and maintainers being tired. Like, we've had this conversation in Gnome before of like, it has been extremely powerful that our issue tracker is really accessible to anybody. Like. It lowers the barrier for reporting an issue, which is awesome when there's somebody who's going to come and report an issue.
Very critical of Bugzilla. I am an avid disliker of Bugzilla. I love the fact that GNOME uses GitLab.
Yeah, same. I love it. Like I remember back when I first started contributing to Gnome and adjacent things, like if somebody told me to like send a patch or even like report an issue, it was like a whole thing. It was a huge pain. And platforms like GitLab make that way easier. They lower the barrier. They make them way more accessible. But it has this kind of flip side of it also creates less of a barrier between, like less of a barrier's not the right word, but less of a buffer, I guess, between the people working on the project and just randos on the internet.
This is an
Um,
argument I've heard about Linux and the mailing list. The mailing
mm,
list is a
mhm,
good filter because, you can
mm.
make a GitLab account because you can sign into the GNOME GitLab with your GitHub account, can't you?
I think so. There's like the
Yeah,
GNOME
yeah,
has
you
actually
can.
been fighting spam and stuff recently, where like you don't have as many permissions if you don't actually have a GNOME membership.
Right.
So there's like there are interesting things that you can do,
But like that,
but in
yeah.
general, like being able to just report an issue is really powerful. Like
Mhm.
that's nice to be able to report it. The
Yeah.
problem is when it's a mostly volunteer project, like every issue that is reported has to be addressed, and the energy you have to address every individual issue diminishes with the more issues that are that
Yeah.
are filed.
Yeah.
And yeah, like with the with Linux and the mailing list, like I've also heard that it's a huge, like some of the workflow there is a huge pain, and it is a real barrier to people to contribute who otherwise would contribute. And so it's hard. You have to kind of balance making it accessible and easy to actually onboard people in a way, but also not exposing your maintainers and your developers to just every piece of criticism that any rando wants to just anonymously or anonymously throw at them. It's hard, and I don't think anybody has a perfect solution to it. I think something that like I like the direction of, and I would be interested in Gnome doing more of, is that Gnome has a process for membership, and like becoming a Gnome member, a member of the Gnome Foundation is a thing, and there's a threshold. You have to have done some sort of contribution to the project in the last couple of years, and then you have every 2 years it has to be renewed, and like it it creates some sort of a baseline to say, okay,
Mhm.
if you have membership, like you probably can comment on anything on GitLab.
Mhm.
But if you don't have membership, if you just registered your account today or whatever, like maybe you're well intentioned, maybe maybe you're reporting a real issue, but there's a lot more volume of like spam and just vitriol or whatever, like just
Yeah.
just garbage
Well,
that can
speaking,
come through too.
this is a complete side tangent, but have you been on Mastodon today?
Not much.
Okay, because I don't know.
What's going on?
Maybe
I'm messing.
maybe you weren't involved in it, but there was a concerted bot campaign to sign up to like a bunch of these, like it has like these random trash instances that are like just
Mm,
no sign up nonsense. Like it's just like anybody can sign up. It's whatever. And there was
yeah, yeah.
a bunch of spam accounts that were just linking to a Discord server, and I was getting like
Mm.
hundreds of notifications about it.
Oh my gosh.
Um, so people noticed because it was the same message every time. Someone tried to
Hmm.
the way someone tried to block it was blocking the first line of it, konnichiwa, which is hello in Japanese, which is not the
Right.
correct term to block it
Right.
on. Please
Right.
don't
Right.
block
Right.
out hello.
Like,
They
man,
blocked
anybody
it.
saying hello in Japanese is blocked. Yeah.
They blocked it instead on the Discord link, and
Yeah.
now
Yeah. That
they've
makes
swapped over to Korean text. So
Incredible.
and with a different Discord link.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
spam's a
It's
big
like
problem in anything, even
right.
that.
Right. Yeah. And so yeah, you can have these you can have positive and negative consequences of making things more accessible, right? Like more accessible to people to read, to write. Um, we an analogy I like to make too is like, even if you're working on an open source project, like yes, you work in the open. Yes, like the actual code is in the open. Yeah, it's great if the issue tracking and project management and stuff can be in the open as much as possible. But
Mhm.
like if you were working on an open source project as a company in an office,
Mhm.
you probably wouldn't have a 24/7 open door policy to anybody who wants to walk into that office, right?
Right.
Like there is value in having like walls and doors, like
Mhm.
having some sort of buffer between you and the outside world. Doesn't mean that what you're doing is always in secret. It doesn't mean that you're not sharing your work. You're not just doing a over the wall code dump or whatever.
Mhm.
But like there is value in having some sort of buffer or threshold there where you can communicate within your project. You can have whatever spicier takes or whatever, and
Mhm.
like there are things that you would say in a real world physical office to your coworker about an open source project that you would never say on the internet publicly for everyone to read.
Right.
And so I think that's another solution you can have is like if you have a place where your contributors can come, whether again in the Gnome Foundation or in the Gnome project, I think like foundation membership could be a threshold there of like if you've gone through this, you've demonstrated you're part of the community, you're part of the contributor base, like you have access to this, but it's not this public place where everything you say can be screenshotted and taken out of context and then used to harass you or whatever, which has also happened. So it's hard because you don't want to arbitrarily restrict what people can see and do for your open source project because that can restrict contributions and feedback, but some sort of a buffer I think can be valuable.
Yeah, I think when it comes to at least I don't know how you deal with anything more than that, like the general communication, but at least for public issue tracking, I'm not opposed to having at least like a time buffer. Like if you sign up with a new account, you can't report anything for 30 minutes, an hour, whatever it is. I know that does create problems because then if someone's completely new, then maybe they just won't want to go back to it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard, right? There's always like this is if okay, given infinite resources and money or whatever, like I would say every open source project should have like people who triage issues that are different than the people who maintain the project.
Yeah, full-time triagers. They can do it.
Like that'd be hugely valuable though, because like a lot of times, like I'm happy to do that triage work on a project that I don't actually maintain. Like I'm happy to be like, okay, I see what they're saying, or oh, this is just a troll, whatever, just delete it, or close it, or this is a person who is repeating the same argument that somebody else made, and I can combine the issues. Like doing that work is tiring, but if you're less invested in the project itself, like if it was on like I'm trying to think of some rant, like GTK itself, sure. Like I don't contribute to GTK besides talking to the GTK people every once in a while and sharing my thoughts. Like I don't write any code for GTK, whatever. But like, so it would be easier for me as somebody who's kind of disconnected from the development to go and triage issues, to go through and say, okay, I see what this person's reporting. I see like, okay, this is a duplicate thing. Like, but if you're the one who's also invested in writing code and doing all that and is already overworked and tired and everything, then like doing that triage is hard. And so you're going to be a little bit more short with people. You're going to just be more direct, not as, I don't want to say like political isn't what's the right word, but like, less careful in your language, maybe like, so yeah, it's just hard. Like, given infinite money, I think that would be a really valuable thing. Is be like, there just needs to be people who go through and just triage stuff and kind of create that buffer between the maintainers and the actual like the fire hose of anybody being able to say anything on any issue or pull request. Pull request is another thing. It's like so often there will be a pull request where it's like there are people there that are doing work, and it is as if they are in the office, like they're doing code review, like they're sitting their desks next to each other, but it just happens to be it's actually on a public GitLab instance. And then just some random person from the internet walks in and just like brigades the issue, and they're like, this is bad, you should do it this way, whatever. And it's like, who are you? Like, why are you here showing up in my office critiquing my work that like you're not a part of this? But it's also super valuable to like have that stuff publicly. So it's so hard to manage, and I don't know what the right answer is.
That especially is a concern that I have. Like, so obviously when I talk about something, you're going to have, no matter what I say, I can say, don't go to this project. I can just not give a link to it. I can like black out names. People are still gonna find it. And it's this hard thing. 'Cause I really like to talk about like issues. I really like to talk about merge requests. But
yeah, it can be really interesting and really revealing to see the process, right?
But especially when something isn't going well, like I'm sure I am very, very critical of the way that Wayland is handled. For example, I can't look. Maybe you would disagree with me. I kind of wish the project started with a BDFL. I feel like it would have had a very different trajectory. I'm sure people involved in the project completely disagree with me about that, but there's just a lot of cases where I look at it from the outside and I just don't know how people can't agree on like basic things. And like just like super, like not even agreeing on like the implementation, but just agreeing that there is a problem. Like that by itself is already bad enough for me. And when I do those negative videos, no matter what I say, there is going to be people that not maybe not negative is not the correct term, like critical maybe.
Mhm.
There's going to be people that go there and I don't know, defend my honor, do whatever term you want to use, like go there to start arguments themselves or anything else like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like I was saying, it's hard because it can be really valuable to show the world or specific people, especially people who are interested in getting involved, like how the sausage is made or
Yeah.
whatever. But yeah, it's also like, man, if people are just gonna like come and comment on a merge request out of nowhere, or like, you know, bike shed a decision, and it's like, okay, like who are you? Like, why are
I
you
have
just showing up
encouraged
here?
specific people to do so before that have like specific requirements. Like I have a blind game dev friend, and he feels like the like Wayland icon thing is like an accessibility thing because he needs like
Mm,
the icons to be able to determine which windows are which sometimes because he uses this system at like 1600% zoom. Like he can
okay,
see
yeah,
it, but it's like very very limited vision.
yeah.
So seeing just the Wayland icon on every window makes it a bit harder to use the system than it like really should
Yeah,
be.
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
And
that's
like
interesting. I like an approach I like from the Gnome side too, is talking about like, okay, yeah, Gnome doesn't like customization and preferences or whatever, but like when it comes to accessibility, like you do have to approach it from that angle of like
mhm,
how, if this is actually solving a problem for somebody with some sort of limitations, or like hardware that's different from yours or whatever, like, yeah, I think it's important to think of things not just in the ideal, well, this is how I think it should work, but in the like, how is this actually used by people?
yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And like people like encouraging specific people like that to get involved is I feel is fairly valuable. But as like a general
Mm,
like Me Too issues, like oh Me Too, I have this issue. Oh, I have this issue. Like no, stop it. Like
yeah.
if you
Do,
have
do the little thumbs up or whatever
yeah
if there's an option for it.
if you
Yeah,
have like a additional I feel like additional logs can have value, but if you're just
yeah.
saying I have this issue as well, like that by
Right.
itself, I don't feel has any value. Maybe if it's like an issue that hasn't been there's been no conversation for like 3 years. If there's some way you can start a conversation together, even like
Yeah.
usually what happens then is the maintainer comes in to say, well, pull request, merge request welcome, whatever, and it's like, oh, patch is welcome. Like, yeah, it's I. I get wanting to get involved. Like that is totally understandable. Like you wanna push this to get better, you wanna push this to get fixed, but if there's nothing productive to add to the conversation, like oftentimes it's just extra noise, really.
Yeah. I think that's the important thing to think about if you're ever reporting an issue or commenting on an issue or a merge request, whatever, is like, does this actually provide new information that can be acted upon? Or is this just me sharing my opinion or my thoughts or whatever? Like, usually a merge request or even an issue report is not the right place to share your thoughts and opinions.
Yeah.
It's usually a place to share an issue that you're having or information that can help solve the issue. Like, if it's like you're wrong and this is why you're wrong, it's like that's not usually the most productive way to approach it. Or yeah, I have this issue too and it's making me hate this project and whatever. And it's like, okay, that's not actually helping. Like, yeah, I do like that most of these like issue tracking platforms these days have like the thumbs up, thumbs down reactions, whatever.
Mhm.
Because it used to be, I would anytime I'd link to an
Plus one,
issue
plus
report
one, plus
anywhere,
one.
I'd be like, please don't just comment +1, or please don't just comment me too.
I've seen very old Debian issue trackers where the entire or the issues where the
Yeah,
entire thing is just plus
bump,
ones. Bump,
come on.
bump. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a good.
the oldest forum. Yeah, it's like no, but I really like that they have these like reactions now, because I can tell then it gives you an action, this is hilarious. This is a technique that people say to use with toddlers as well. Is don't tell them what not to do, but tell them what they should do instead.
Right.
But I mean, that works with anybody, right? It's like, don't just say like, please don't comment me too on this issue, but you can say, hey, if this affects you, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Please only comment if you have new information.
Right.
And like that has been really helpful, because it tells people like, hey, I'm not posting this link to have you go brigade this issue and derail the discussion or whatever, but that count of how many people thumbs it up can be one signal to say, oh, this actually is, important to a lot of people or affects a lot of people.
Mhm.
So I think that's an interesting thing that I'm happy to see has become like pretty standard on, GitLab and GitHub have it. I'm
Yeah.
sure other platforms do too. But like, I really like that there's a distinction between a really easy way to be like, yes, I'm affected by this versus like just commenting and creating more noise.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Um, I guess I want to shift directions a bit to talk
Yeah,
about
yeah.
uh a lot of the conversation around, especially really big projects that have been around for a really long time. A lot of the conversation that happens around it ends up being, I guess, based on things that are just no longer true. It's
Mm.
usually
Mm.
oftentimes it's not people making things up, but it's
Yeah.
things that haven't been the case for a long time. Like my favorite recent one is Gnome is FSF. Gnome is GNU, which was true a very
Sort
long
of
time
a
ago.
very long time ago. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, there's these misconceptions or outdated information that get just spread. It's kind of saying this earlier. It's like it's not quite a meme, but that's the best word I can think of for it. Of like, it's this thing that people say and it gets repeated and it gets repeated and it gets repeated until like people just believe it because they hear it so
The
much.
Wayland protocol is made for GNOME. That's
Yeah, yeah.
another
It's like,
one.
do you know who's all contributing and using this and doing like, yeah, 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 yeah. That's a good one. Or like, I mean, this is whatever, a little inflammatory maybe. It's like GNOME only removes features, and like what I always like to do is be like, okay, let me take you to the release notes and show you all the features that were added. There were no features removed actually, but there were these settings were added, these settings were added, these settings were added, these settings were added, and like, and that's been the case for like 5 years. That like the settings available in GNOME have actually expanded and increased
Yeah.
over the last 5 years more than they've ever been before. And yet people will still, I'll still say, oh, I'll still hear people say like, I don't use GNOME because they're just going to remove all these features. And it's like, have you actually been like paying attention?
But there's always like
Yeah.
either some truth to it, or it was the case at a time where, like, there was a time where a lot of things were being cut back and they were trying to like
yeah. It's
solidify the core.
right. Especially if you go from, GNOME 2 to GNOME 3,
Yeah.
like there's GNOME 2 was like every setting was its own little app. And like, it was kind of, you had the top bar and then you had the drop down and like every little, like you want to change your wallpaper, that opens its own little dialogue or its own little app or whatever. And so maybe the way you experienced GNOME 2 was different because you were using it from a different distributor. You're using it, the Ubuntu one, which included other things or whatever. And then, yeah, when there was a change to GNOME 3, when they put everything all into one settings app, it made it much easier to find settings and things, but it also meant that, yeah, there weren't as many settings and features and options there. And yet, since that point until today, I'm pretty sure it's only ever been like adding new things.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's I don't know if I'd say there's truth to it. There is like a seed of
Yeah.
information there that is it's coming from somewhere. It's not just made up. It's coming from something.
It's kind of like a game of telephone, right? Or like whatever.
Yeah.
I know different people call it different things. Where like someone says
Yeah.
one thing, they whisper it in the next person's ear, whisper it in the next
Yep.
person's ear, and 10 people down the line, you go from, I don't know, Red Hat is involved in the GNOME project and employs a lot of developers to Red Hat owns GNOME, IBM controls everything and pulls the strings. Like,
Yeah.
somehow along the way, it just morphs into this completely different thing.
Yeah, and it's hard. It's I've said this many times, but nuance is hard on the internet. And when you have that game of telephone, the nuance is lost, right?
Yeah.
So like, if there's this seed of truth, it gets repeated enough times, inaccurately enough times, and over again, and then of course affected by people's different perceptions. That yeah, you end up with something that's like, what? This is not true and has never been true. An example on the elementary side, when I was working with elementary, is like people would call elementary OS like a walled garden platform, and it's like, okay, I think the seed of truth there is that very similar to GNOME, that like elementary has a vision for how things should work. And the elementary app center to submit an app to the app center, like it has to follow certain guidelines because that's what elementary decided that they want, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't mean that like you as the end user don't have control over. It's not like using an Apple device where like you can only get apps from a certain source, or you can only run what they say you can run. Like,
Yeah.
so the seed of truth is that, okay, yes, there's an opinionated, curated experience, but also you can add any Flatpak remote. Also, you can download and run whatever you want, like on your own computer. It's yours. Like, you can do what you want. And so I think that's, yeah, a lot of times there is a seed of truth there, but you kind of, it gets reiterated, and the meaning of it, or the actual like nuance, gets lost.
Well, I think in some cases, not necessarily a seed of truth. I think in some cases, it's just people are not aware of the change. Like, there's a lot of people, especially, I'm going to keep going back to Wayland because it's such a good example of this. There are a lot of people that think random things that aren't broken anymore are still broken. Like video capture, for example. I hear often like, oh, you can't do video capture on Wayland. I'm literally recording this right now on Wayland. Yeah. Or there's no equivalent to Redshift. There's nothing equivalent to Xrandr. And yes, this was true at a time. And I think this is looping back again. A lot of projects are really bad at... Sometimes they're really bad at saying the why, but sometimes they're also saying really bad... they're really bad at saying the what as well, just indicating that something actually is going on. Like, in many cases, these are things that have been fixed, but because the discussion about it being fixed, or like it's some like random project on a GitHub somewhere, because the conversation hasn't been had and people are not aware of those solutions being in place, people still think it's in the state it used to be in, and no progress has been made. And I get it, because oftentimes these are very technical problems and they're not entirely clear what's going on, and like it makes sense. Like, not everyone has 8 hours a day to read up on exactly the state of every project on their system. I totally get it.
Yeah.
But this, once again, going back to the bad actors, there are some people who, even if you tell them and you show them that this is not the case anymore, they will still say that, no, it is the case, and no, you're wrong because some reason that doesn't make any sense. But when someone is acting in good faith, usually you can at least explain that across properly.
Right. You can at least say, like, well, okay, this thing you said, that used to be true and it's not, and here's why. I think I have a spicy take. I don't know if it's spicy, whatever. That something that I've actually experienced, though, is that like LTS distros contribute to this problem. Like, LTS distros have a reason for existing and whatever, but I think it is true that they contribute to this problem of people having outdated information because they're experiencing something that was released 4 years ago, maybe.
Right. If you're on 1804 right now. Yeah.
It's like, maybe if you're trying to use Wayland on 1804 or whatever, like, whatever it is, like, maybe, you have outdated information because you're literally running something from 4 years ago. And that's, again, there's reasons these things exist. There are reasons to run, known, stable, whatever software, but like, you can't use that experience to say that objectively something is true or false, because you're very outdated. And so I see that with with things like, oh, Wayland is buggy because it does this, or it'll even be like, this specific project on this specific distro, the way it was integrated was buggy, or the specific release they were using was buggy. And so it's hard to, like, you'll go out and just like make these sweeping statements of, oh, this thing sucks because it's broken. It's like, well, I mean, if it's broken on your distro that was released 4 years ago, and we fixed that 4 years ago, and it's kind of hard to keep repeating that same information. But if there are a lot of people using that version, like, that's their experience with it. So yeah, it's hard. It's hard to balance.
I think the biggest example of this, the most like widespread example, is the people who how do I say it? The general hatred for Pulse Audio. And that the reason why it exists makes sense. Like, in 2006, 2007, it was buggy. When Fedora adopted it and Ubuntu adopted it, they didn't adopt it well. They had broken configs, and it did genuinely break people's audio back then. Lennart literally came out and said, he described Pulse Audio as the software that currently breaks your audio. He was the guy involved in making it. He didn't
Right.
think it should have been adopted at well, like when it was, and that
Yeah.
that has just stuck with the project through all those. There are people who were not using Pulse Audio, who were not using Linux, who weren't. There are people who weren't alive back when that was the case, who
Yeah.
who still have this perception that Pulse Audio was a buggy mess. And when we started shifting away to Pipewire, it wasn't a buggy mess. It's in a fairly good state. We swapped for other reasons, not because it was broken.
Right. But yeah. So you get these like outdated perceptions, or like you say, there's that seed of truth. There's that, yeah, that used to be the case, but it hasn't been for a long time. Or yeah, I can see how you got to that conclusion, but that's not really accurate. So it's hard. That kind of touches on a point where something I always try to do when I'm either like writing a social media post or like blog post, and like you can go too far down this hole, but I like to think of everything you're communicating defensively, not like get defensive in an argument, but like if you're writing a blog post for as an open source project, uh, preempt what you expect the critique to be, or if you know there are misconceptions about something that you're writing about, preemptively address those in your blog post or your announcement, because and you're never going to predict every single critique that every single person has, but a lot of times you can predict some of them, or a lot of them, or the most common ones.
Yeah.
And I think some people they have the approach of like, oh, I just don't want to talk about that because they're wrong, and so I'm not going to give them whatever. But it's like, no, if you know this is what most, or what a lot of people are going to share your article or your blog post and say like, oh, look, they're doing this thing and it's bad because X, Y, and Z. Like, if you know they're going to say that, like, address it in the article. Because then if they do share that, then it's like, you obviously didn't read the article, or read the announcement or whatever it is. I'm trying to think of a specific example of this, but this is something I try to do a lot of like, it's like, oh, so a good example from something really recent. I wrote the blog post for FlatHub announcing the, over 1 million active users. And anytime you talk about like metrics or telemetry in open source, I mean, we know this, you get people who are like, oh, you're, whatever, you're my privacy. And I say that out of context, that could be bad. I am one of the most fanatical like privacy advocates that I know. Like, I feel very strongly about privacy and individual privacy, and not sharing personal data, not gathering up personal data. And so, because we know that about our audience from the FlatHub perspective, like, we know people are going to be like, oh, well, they're tracking everything we download. So we preemptively say, we don't rely on client-side information. We're not sending any information from your computer to a server. We're not doing that. Like, even though it should be obvious, or we think it should be obvious, that it's like, of course we don't do that. But we know that if people hear this, that says, oh, they're tracking how many users they have, they're gonna complain about this. So you preempt some of that perception. You say, no, we're not doing it.
I'm gonna scare people. If you connect to a web server, they will probably log your IP. In their system logs, your IP will be there.
This is a thing that happens. Also, if you run a Linux distribution, you trust whoever maintains that Linux distribution with 100% of everything.
I've got a video coming out about exactly this. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like, and now we're getting into an interesting area. So this is a conversation we've had about metrics and telemetry and things. And like, one of the arguments is, well, if you do telemetry or any sort of metrics, now I have to trust you as the person who's making the distribution or whatever. And it's like, you already have to trust us. Like, if I am, distro foo, whatever, just making up a distro. If I'm distro foo and you're running distro foo and I don't have any telemetry whatsoever that tells me how the product is used, you still are trusting that, like, I'm not pushing out an update to your computer that then sends me all of your data, or that I'm not changing the software in ways that you don't know, or that I'm not using root access to access things on your private device. Like, there's already a level of trust there.
I think,
and so it's just interesting that, like,
yeah, I think
you do have to trust it.
I think a better way to look at that is not I have to trust you, because yeah, you are right there, but just I don't want you to have that information. Like I can
Yeah,
trust
yeah,
someone. I can trust someone to like, be around my family or whatever, but I don't necessarily want them to have a copy of my driver's license, for example. Like
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. And so, yeah, that's where like the argument. There are other arguments that absolutely can and should be made, and that's why things are designed the way they are. But like the argument of if you do this, we have to trust you is I think is interesting. But that's
yeah, no,
way off the track of the original conversation. But yeah, it was. We had a lot of interesting conversations at FOSS. I'll put it that way. It was a enlightening discussion.
I definitely want to talk about the like handling communication with like videos and blogs because this is kind of the reason why I wanted to do this in the first place because I got a lot of criticism for the way that I did my video on the FlatHub guidelines. I stand by a lot of the points I brought up. A lot of people don't like the reasons I brought up some of those points, but I stand by the points I brought up. Yeah. I understand that the way that I brought them up, though, probably wasn't... I feel like they might... This goes back to what I was saying. I like to put in humor in my videos, and this is especially true of different cultures and political values, and one of the things in Alan's... I'm jumping all over the place. Apologies here. Hopefully you can follow along what I'm saying. In Alan's talk, one of the things he brought up is using humor. And I think you should be cautious about that because there are a lot of different cultures out there who, like... There are certain cultures that simply don't understand sarcasm. Like, sarcasm is just not a concept. And if you try to do that, like, they'll... Oftentimes people who don't have experiences in other cultures, they'll take what you're saying at face value. Like... Completely
literally,
yeah. Exactly.
It's a funny anecdote about this is, like, my wife, her family... I don't know. I don't think they will watch this. Her whole family is very sarcastic, and growing up, my family is not very sarcastic. And when we started dating, that was something that like I tripped up on so many times. Is like, especially like, my mother-in-law now, she would like say something, and I'd be like, "What?" She's like, and then my wife, my girlfriend at the time, Katie, would be like, she's being sarcastic. Like, she would have to like interpret for me, and like I've gotten much better at picking up on it. But like that's a very real, like, even people who are close to you, there's miscommunications on how you approach humor and inflection and tones and stuff. So yeah, it's hard. It's I think the point from my recalling Alan's talk is like, it is okay for it to be a lighthearted environment. And things are generally going to be better. Come off better if you kind of build that rapport by having a lighthearted environment. And like, not everything has to be so serious, especially when you're in an open source project where people are spending their free time. Like, people don't always want to go and just be 100% serious in their hobby project, right? Like, people want to have fun. And so, yeah, it's hard because humor can definitely differ between cultures and people. But I think having that, trying to keep it lighthearted is definitely something worth your time.
Yeah, you bring up that as a...
But yeah, that's like... The FlatHub stuff is interesting because it's, if people are, okay, you're talking about some specific screenshot on the docs or whatever, like you're really hounding on it because it's kind of funny, and it's also like, this is stupid, and like you're entertained by that, but then people are like, wow, I can't believe they were so offended by that thing, and it's like, well, okay, you have to see it from their perspective. Like, it's kind of this funny thing, or you were trying to make it, you're being, what's the word? They're like you can be hyperbolic, right? Like, and that can be a way to be lighthearted and be humorous, is to be hyperbolic. But like, if you take it out of context, or if you don't catch that that's what's happening, you could be really offended and be like, wow, I can't believe that they were so upset by that. And
I definitely saw people who were like, oh, well, you wouldn't care if it was this political leaning or that political, no, that's not what I'm saying. That's like, the general point I was trying to get there is, I don't feel like it's the place for official documentation to be including like potentially controversial figures. Like, that's exactly. I could have said that, and that would have made the point clearer. I'm sure people would still be like, oh, this person's not controversial, blah, blah, blah. You're
right. You could disagree. Yeah.
But that was my entire point there. I don't think, like, especially because the official image was just like some generic... I don't know if it was a person in the project or if it was like an AI face or something. It was just some random woman. I think her name was like... It was like the generic... the name they used for like... I think it was Jane
Angela
Smith.
Avery.
Yeah, it was like... Jane Smith or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Um,
yeah. And it's one of those, yeah, like, and I think that's both sides that are a good point about communication of like, yeah, is official documentation a good place to put in like kind of a meme troll whatever thing? Like probably not. That's probably not the right place. Like I find it really funny because
it's
like
pretty funny.
I'm like it's funny that it got people talking, and then like it's this meme that keeps coming up now. Like people saw at FOSDEM, like somebody put like the Communist Manifesto like on the Gnome booth. Like it wasn't a Gnome person who did it, but like somebody was trolling us. So like they put it on the booth and then took a picture, and there's like, oh, some interesting stuff from Gnome, and it's like I find that hilarious because it's just like it's just this meme, right? Yeah. But if it's out of context or whatever, like yeah, you could be like, okay, you're kind of going a little far there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like yeah, as a project, you should preemptively understand how people are going to interpret something, if funny meme joke whatever to you. Like some people are going to take it way too seriously, and then also if you're if you're looking at or if you come across that in a project where it's like, oh, that's weird, like it might just be a goofy joke. Like it's probably not as serious as you think it is. Like
Yeah.
sometimes people who get really bored making mock-ups all day every day put little memes and jokes in their mock-ups, and that's like
absolutely understandable. I noticed this. I like to do April Fool's videos, and because I'm in Australia, they always go up the day before, which makes it funnier.
Oh yeah.
So I think last year I did a video. I don't know how it was so on the nose. This is what I mean by there are some cultures that have zero concept of sarcasm. I think there are some cultures that have zero concept of humor. Because I made a video. It was the most ridiculous video possible. I basically said that I'm actually not an Arch Linux user. I just have a highly customized version. It wasn't Ubuntu. It was like a meme version of Ubuntu called Ubuntu. Which is like an anime meme version of it. And I was like, no, I've actually just modified all of these different files. I've modified my Neo
make it look like art.
Yeah, to make it. I'm just like I have a wrapper around Pac-Man, around app to make it look like Pac-Man, and it took some people like seriously 8 minutes into the video. Like there's another year where I pretend like no, I'm actually like secretly a Windows user, and it's like no,
it's people like. Even if you think it's the funniest thing, like there's always going to be people who misinterpret or just don't get the joke. And like, yeah, obviously you can't like make everything super clear to everybody all the time. Like people are going to misunderstand things. But
those videos are intentionally unclear. I just want to see how long it takes some people to catch on.
Yeah. Oh man, we had this reminds me at FOSDEM at the Gnome booth, we had an idea for some April Fool's joke and I don't remember what it was now. Dang it, I didn't write it down. Yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with April Fools because it's like because of that exact reason, right? Of like some people get really offended that you wasted their time, like you made them think something and you got them, and it's like, all right, like I think if it's lighthearted enough and like or obvious enough, okay, if you got them for a minute and then they read to the end and it says Happy April 1st or whatever, like I think that could be fine, but yeah, it's also like maybe something that you think is really obvious and funny is not going to come off that way to other people.
Yeah.
So,
when you mention projects being lighthearted, are you aware of the really cursed Windows 11 LinkedIn hotkey?
Like what, Control Alt Shift L or whatever it is, or super whatever.
Control Alt Super Control Alt Windows L. So in KDE, when that sort of popped off, someone made an issue. Yeah, okay, you are aware of it. For anyone who isn't, someone made a issue or a merge request on the KDE project and was like, for Windows one-to-one compatibility, we need to replicate this hotkey. And then people started suggesting other hotkeys that should be added as well. Yeah. It's like, oh, should we have one for like, have one for like the KWin documentation, all those other random things. Yeah. Should we only support FOSS platforms, things like that?
Yeah. I think like that stuff can be fun as long as it's, it doesn't go, I guess, too far or whatever. Like, but yeah, if that's, it is hard. It's a hard balance, right? It's like if somebody came in and was like, thought you were actually discussing this, they'd probably be like, what the heck? But I think it's, if you can have some fun in your issue tracker and have some fun in your conversations and it's, harmless fun. And it's just, that's going to make your community, I think, more healthy on the internally, right? Like you're healthy. If people have fun when they come to contribute and people have fun or they don't have to take everything so seriously. I think that can be a positive for sure. That's why I love, that's the positive side of like following a lot of open source people on social media is like, on the one side, like, okay, social media can be stressful and whatever, but it can also let you get to know people better. And,
Mhm.
I love when people post about not the project that I follow them for,
Mhm.
because that just like, if they get super nerdy about some other thing, or like just are talking about their family life or their whatever, or their biking or their hiking or their like whatever their thing is, to me that makes it more of a genuine connection. It makes it more lighthearted. And I enjoy that. I enjoy that it doesn't all have to be like super technical on point about the project itself.
Yeah, I follow Arian O'Connell on Mastodon, and the other day I opened the website and there was this giant thread talking about utes. Like, do you know what a ute is?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, cool. For anyone who doesn't know, it's like a sedan with a flatbed. It's like
yeah,
Australian car trend. At least it was
yeah.
when we had a car industry. And just this giant thread about like building a ute and like what is the specific definition of a ute. It's like
Just
I don't
getting
know
into
why
it.
you were talking about this, but sure, okay, this is fun. Why
Yeah,
not?
that's awesome. Yeah, yeah. That's so funny. Yeah, it's just like it it provides insight and humor, and just like, again, I think it's similar to that like in person aspect of like when you meet these people, you meet the real person, not just the like official voice of whatever. And yeah, so I think in a lot of ways social media can be powerful in that way.
Mhm.
It's hard. It's so hit or miss though, because like there's a lot of ups and downs
Yeah.
with being so public, or so exposed to everything about your project, or every bit of criticism. It's hard. It's also hard the other way. Like I've known a lot of open source contributors that like they're like, I'm gonna block people very I don't know, they have a very low barrier to being like, I'm gonna click block.
Right.
And on the one hand, it's like, yeah, absolutely, like that if that's better for your mental health, just to like block that noise out. And then, but I've also seen from the other side is people get really offended when they get blocked by, you know, contributor to whatever project here, and they're like, I can't believe they blocked me. I didn't even say anything bad. And it's like, well, that's their right. Like they don't have to listen to you. Like even if you never said anything objectively bad or whatever, like
Mhm.
you you got to manage it both ways. Like I think you have to remember that these people are the open source contributors in general are generally very overworked, very tired, very burnt out. And they are exposed, especially in our
Mhm.
modern social media world, they're exposed to so much noise that they might be using the block feature just to block out noise that they're not interested in. And
Yeah.
like it's not personal at all. And so it's easy to get offended. Like it's easy to be like, I can't believe they don't listen to me. And it plays into the, oh, they don't listen to users or whatever, that if you want to go that way. But like,
Mhm.
it's also like their right to listen to the voices they want to and not listen to the ones they don't, I guess. So
Yeah.
it's
Like
hard. Yeah.
if you like think about it in like real world context, if you're having conversation with someone and then you just like I'm not involved in I don't want to be involved in this anymore and you walk away, like that's pretty much what it is. And sure, I get
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
are like they get offended by that, like, oh, you know, why you do this? But like, I don't want to associate with like the crackhead that's on the street. So like I'm gonna block you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, or
Like I
you're
don't
just not interested in that conversation now, and
yeah,
you don't. Yeah. 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 I think different people have different like what's the word? Different understandings
thresholds.
of what. Or just different like reasons for using the block, or different
Sure.
understandings
Yeah,
of
yeah,
what
yeah,
a
yeah.
block means. Like a block, if you think of it only in a like, oh, if you block someone it's because you absolutely hate everything about them, it's like, no, well, obviously that's, you're gonna get offended. But like some people just are like, I'm just here to listen to the. Some people are like, I'm on social media to only hear about this one specific topic, and so just block everyone that doesn't talk about that topic. And that's like, they can use it that way. That's fine.
Absolutely.
Um, that's hard
Yeah.
because then if you do, you can, as a user, or as somebody who's wanting to engage with an open source project, you can feel like you're not being listened to. But
Mhm.
there are also other avenues to share your feedback besides some personal person's social media account. Like,
Mhm.
um, yeah,
Well, last thing I want to touch on, and we're gonna try to navigate this subject in a sensible way. Now, I waited to the end for a specific reason here. I want to talk about this general trend of like these YouTube hit pieces, and I know that there is like a lot of history, especially there's less history as one of them, but they've both been around for a very long time. A lot of people who developed opinions for a long time. And I don't want to focus on the specific individuals and their specific circumstances, but as like a general sense, if you feel like someone has over the years been like a detriment to your community, to the general space, and all of that, do you like? What are your general thoughts on like just not just blocking them out, but actively going after them? Because I think those are two different things, right? If you don't want to associate with someone, totally you're right. Absolutely, don't associate with anyone you don't want to associate with. But actively, basically doing to them what you're accusing of them, they are doing. Like that's basically the point I'm getting at there.
Yeah, I think this is hard because it's I don't know what I don't know what I believe. No, I don't know what the right answer is necessarily. Because there's I think in general, if there is somebody who is abusive or dangerous, like in not I'm not even saying just in open source, but like in general, like deplatforming, I think works. Like that, I think we've seen examples of that where there is somebody who's riling people up for a specific thing that is dangerous or inciting violence or whatever, and if you just like exclude them, you don't engage, you don't promote anything, you don't talk about them, you don't even say their name. Like in that way, I think deplatforming and just like shutting them out, ignoring them, whatever, I think that is probably the most effective thing you can do. Without getting super into politics, like I think that's something I get upset when I see like news, like articles that just like constantly are talking about some polarizing person, and like it's like you're feeding the beast at that point. You're giving them the attention they want. You're talking about them, you're giving them the attention. And a lot of times people who are out there riling people up, whatever, like they're seeking attention. So I think the most effective thing you can do is just not give that attention. So if you as a community have had bad experiences with somebody or have don't believe somebody's doing good, whatever, like I think the most effective thing you can do is just disengage. Then there's that next step of like we use like a hit piece or like a video or an article or something that is specifically going in and saying like, here's this bad thing, here's what they did, X, Y, and Z. I mean, I'm thinking of, there's I think I know what you're referencing as far as some recent videos that came out, but I'm also thinking of like there are other things that came out in the past of like blog posts,
political people as well. Like
yeah.
News outlets love when there is a controversial figure because their ratings just shoot through the roof because they the people who hate the person will watch it, the people who love the person will watch it. Everybody is like, let's get engaged in the drama.
Yeah, and so I think my instinct is to say like, no, that's bad. Don't feed the beast, don't fuel it, you don't need to go and talk about this thing in depth and in detail. But then I see the flip side too of like maybe it's if there's been a certain amount of time or if there's been a certain amount of, I don't know, if it's something you're like this is really dangerous or really bad and not enough people know that that's the case, I can see the value in like from an informational, sharing information to say like this is what this person has done and this is why people are upset with them. Like on the one hand, I don't like that you're giving that person more attention if you think they're bad or whatever. But on the other hand, I think it can be beneficial to share that information, to give the context, to say this is the history of the interactions with this person. But I do think it is a fine line. I think there's a fine line between sharing information, I guess almost three different things of like sharing information and also just like giving attention and also like being more of a hit piece or being more of like a negative angle around it. So yeah, it's hard. I don't know.
Well,
I think anytime I see something like this, I feel I don't know what the right answer is.
Right.
There's I'm trying to think of something as not as recent that um if there's conflict between two open source projects or something, and it's like, and somebody writes a blog post that says working with project X is terrible, and here's why, and it might be all accurate and factual and correct, and they might think that they're doing the right thing by saying, I want to expose this to the world, but is that actually solving anything? Like, is that where, like, is it actually benefiting anybody to go out and do this piece that's documenting here's all the negative things that have happened or whatever? I don't know. It's hard because then you as the person who's writing this or making this video, you feel that you're obligated to like inform people about this thing that's happening. So yeah, it's hard.
I think there's a couple of things to touch on there. You mentioned deplatforming working, and I disagree in a sense, because especially with the way the communication is done in the FOSS world, like if you say, oh, this person is, I don't want to interact with them on Mastodon, like you can't get rid of someone on Mastodon. Like there are exceptions, like, what happened with Gab, where there was a concerted effort for the entire Fediverse to block out this instance. But in most cases, it's not as clear. And even if it's basically just more like a concerted effort to not interact with them in that case, because like they can't really be removed. And also you're seeing this development of these like alternative platforms as well, where even if they're no longer on like the mainstream ones, they can still have a fairly large audience on Rumble, BitChute, whatever other platform they happen to be on. So I wouldn't necessarily agree that it works. It definitely does slow down the potential growth, but I don't think it silences them in the same way.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think people, especially people who have a following, or people who like to rile people up or whatever, like they're always going to find a place, an audience. They're always going to go somewhere. What I think in the case of like deplatforming, it's you are not obligated to give them.
Sure. Yeah. I don't think you should interact with anyone you don't want to interact with. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's when you can use blocking gratuitously. If you're like, I'm just not going to engage with this at all. Like I'm going to block them, whatever. And I think it's valuable. I think as an open source project, if you've had, a particularly negative interaction with a specific person, like I think it is perfectly fine to say, yep, especially if like they violated the code of conduct or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Like, as a consequence, it's like, yeah, if they show up in the forum, like they're going to be blocked and banned. Like that's fine. Like
one thing I will say about code of conduct, sorry for cutting you off, but I think it's important with code of conduct stuff. If someone's going to be banned from a forum for a code of conduct violation, what I really hate is not telling them specifically what they did. Like when it's just like, oh, you broke this rule, and they're like, I didn't break this rule. What did I say? What did I like? By not telling them, you're giving them that free reign, basically, to say, I didn't do anything wrong. I think it's important to make sure that they know what they did, and the other people, so then other people can also know, like, okay, this is what because sometimes rules are, especially when they're like, no harassment, whatever. Like, there's like a line there where, is it harassment? Is it being critical? Is it personal? Is it not? Like, it goes back to what we were saying. Like, where's that line between personal and not personal, and harassment and not harassment? And some people,
making it clear, like why something is being enforced. I think is definitely important. It also can, like I was saying, like preempting things too. Like by being very clear of like this was what you posted, or this is what the interaction that happened. And, so this is the consequence. Like, it makes it so they can't just be like, oh, I'm just being oppressed because of whatever. And it's like, no, like, you can disagree with the decision. That's fine. You can disagree with the code of conduct. That's fine. But, like, this is our community with our code of conduct. This is the rule. This is the thing that happened. This is the consequence. Yeah, I think that is important. I think it's also hard if you are dealing with, like, a lot of, like, as a moderator of a forum or something, it's hard to be like, I'm going to give tons of context for this thing. But yeah, it is like, I've seen instances in the past where somebody was banned from a forum, and it turns out it was actually a misunderstanding or miscommunication. They're like, oh, I didn't know that the thing that I said could be offensive. If you would have just told me that, I would have edited it or whatever.
Right.
So I think that does have value when you say like, okay, here's the thing, here's the reason, and here was the consequence. Yeah.
Going back to the like once again, whatever term people want to call them, whether it's hit pieces or whatever term. I know hit pieces has like an inflammatory meaning to it, and
Yeah.
that's just the first thing that comes to mind. Expose, whatever, as I
There
said,
you
whatever.
go. Yeah. Yeah.
My I think this goes back to a lot of the stuff we were saying earlier. You have to be very careful about how they're how you're presenting the information, how you're conducting yourself, because what's liable? What's likely? We'll go with that one. What's likely to happen? I feel like this is what's happened in the recent examples. Is it hasn't actually moved the needle. Basically, what's happened is you have a lot of people who agree this person was bad already, and they're like, this is a great video, you did great research. Then you have people who disagree, and it's like, this is a terrible video, you did no research. Then you have people kind of in the middle, some who are like, oh, I'm aware of this person now, I think they're bad, and oh, I think I'm aware of this person now, I think they're good. Like, there's no middle ground being built there. It's just you're splitting people into two very clear camps where it's like you're either against this person or you're for this person, and I don't feel like that's a generally healthy place for a community to be in.
Yeah. It's hard because I think I commented on a video that you're referencing of like, I think my comment was similar to what I was saying here of like, I sometimes if I think somebody's abusive or whatever has bad interactions, like sometimes I often hesitate to bring any attention to that, and so I would default to saying like, no, you shouldn't make this video, you shouldn't write this blog post because like you're just drawing attention to this person. And at the same time, I think if you're somebody who's had, very specific negative or abusive interactions with somebody, like you do want other people to know that that's happened. Like I think there is value in saying like, this is the history of this situation. This is the history of this person. This is the interactions that have happened. Yeah. And it's hard because it gets personal. You're talking about personal interactions with people and you're not talking about technical things. And that's a whole other, there's so many other implications there. It's really hard. I think generally if your intent is to share information and to, show something that has happened that people don't know, maybe, especially like, I'm trying to think of an abstract example. It's really hard to talk around a lot of stuff, but like if you are somebody who's been affected by negative actions of a person, and like you also are aware that other people don't know that this has been going on, I think it is important to publicize that, to share that. I think there's different ways you can do it. I think there's better and worse ways, but I think it is, thinking an example of like the Me Too movement, of people who were, sexually harassed. It's like people might say, oh, you shouldn't, make a big fuss about it because whatever, like you should handle it privately. But at the same time, like there is value and there's power in saying, this happened to me, because that can also, allow other people who maybe were afraid to speak out about it to know, oh, there's other people out there, that were affected by this. Like, oh, other people were hurt by this or affected by this. So it's really tricky. And I think I don't know if there's a right answer. I don't know. I said, even I watched these videos. I've seen blog posts in the past of different things, and I always feel mixed about it. I think if your intent is good and you're not just if you're not trying to make a hit piece, not trying to just flame somebody, not trying to tear somebody down, I think that can be beneficial to share the perspective.
What I do think would have happened, or what would have been beneficial in this case, obviously that example is very different. Like the Me Too example, like yeah,
Yeah.
that's like actual criminal things. Like that's very serious. This is just people disagreeing on the internet and arguing with each other. Like that's they're very, there's like whole very different like levels here. You might argue that it's harassment, but like, there's a difference between internet harassment and like sexual assault. Like that, those are
Sure. Yeah.
very different levels on the scale. I tried, and what I would have liked to see, and I kind of wish, even if it happened privately, I would have liked them to have a conversation like this. Sit down, talk to each other, understand like the positions of both people. Because I've seen the videos as well, and what I've noticed is one party thinks everything is this way, the other party thinks everything is this way. There is no middle ground being met there. There's no discussion being had, and I feel like just sitting, because I know there was some like back and forth text conversation. This goes back to what we were saying before. Text is weird. If you can sit down and like talk to someone and have a face-to-face discussion, I feel like that you would handle it in a very different way. Like if you feel like this person you're talking to is they're actually a person, you have some level of empathy for their position, even if you think they're completely wrong. Like there are some people out there that I disagree with every single thing they say, but if you can sit down and have a conversation with someone, you can at least know why they have that perspective and like how they got there and like what they're trying to do. Because I think even if you think someone is just a bad person, like there's going to be fundamental agreements you have. Like most of us will agree, like we want like good things for our family. We want, we want to spend time with our friends, all of these things. Like even with someone like you think is just a terrible human, like there's going to be those things that you're still going to agree with.
Yeah, so you can find common ground.
Sure,
you can
yeah.
try to understand their perspective. Yeah. I still feel really mixed up on it.
Yeah, I know, I do as well. I get it.
There's like I mean, again, I'm like way blowing this out of proportion, but if you take it to the extreme and say like, some evil dictator who kills people, whatever.
Sure.
Like it's like, well, yeah, we can find common ground with them. It's like, yeah, but is that worth your time?
Sure.
Like
yeah, no, in that case,
obviously,
yeah.
again, obviously extreme and hyperbolic there, but like where is that line, right? Like if you think somebody is genuinely harmful and abusive and bad, and is it worth your time to say, oh, let's sit down and have a chat? Like maybe if you're doing thinking of it from a journalistic perspective, maybe that is what you need to do. Maybe sitting down and interviewing them, talking to them, and understanding their point, even if you disagree, and then you go ahead and publish something that says, we sat and talked to this person, and here's what they said, and here's why I don't believe it. That is different than just doing kind of an expose, from other sources or whatever. Mm-hmm. So yeah, maybe there's something there of like, if you're doing it as an informational, as a journalistic thing, like there is some extra effort that could be put in to talk to the people. I do generally think like if you have a disagreement with somebody, the first step is talking to them. And reaching out and seeing. And again, the end result might be that you disagree and you still have the same opinions, but at least you did that step of reaching out and talking.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have anything positive to say before we end it?
Let's see. I'm reading my notes. Like, what can I hit on? This is a dumb one, but I have it in quotes in my notes of, there's the classic, was it Thumper from Bambi? My mom always says, or whatever, like, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all, or whatever. I don't know. Is that the right thing? Is that from Bambi? I don't know. But that I've known people who use that approach to interactions, and I think that can be a really, especially when you're talking publicly, generally like public negativity, like being negative is just, it's usually not, even if you're right, it's usually not gonna change minds. It's usually not gonna be the right thing. If you have a disagreement with a person or a project, see where you do overlap and see what you can agree on and focus on that. And you don't have to smear them or talk negative about them necessarily. in the end, everybody is the hero of their own story. Everyone thinks they're doing what's right. And if you remember that and you try to just align in the ways that you can, I think you'll be more effective.
Going all the way back to the start, software is easy, people are hard.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I gave a talk at the Linux App Summit so long ago now, probably like 2018 or something.
Mm-hmm.
That's it's not always technical. And when you're dealing with, I mean, in open source, but it's really with anything in the world, so many of the hard problems are people problems, are communication problems. Yeah, and as much as you can understand that and do your best to communicate better, you're going to be in a better place, I think.
I felt like this was a good episode. I hope people
Yeah.
learned something from it.
I hope so too.
We had less disagreements than I thought we did, but hey, that's fine.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess direct people wherever. I know you mentioned the FlatHub blog before, so that was over on what's the website for that one?
Yeah, the URL is kind of annoying because it's on the docs site, so it's docs.flathub.org/blog. We should probably redirect blog.flathub there or something.
maybe.
But yeah, if you go to the FlatHub blog, there's some good stuff there. I'm hoping to get another post there soon, maybe by the time people are watching this. And then yeah, my website where you can find links to everything else that I do on the internet is just CassidyJames.com.
Awesome.
So there's links to my Mastodon and GitHub and all that stuff out there if you want to interact and chat.
Oh, you got a link to when you're on the show. Oh, that's cool.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. I try to do that with like recent like kind of podcast or video appearances, whatever. Because it's like, yeah, people want to hear from me, want to see what I've talked about. That's there. I'm also going to plug, if you're interested in open source, especially on the Gnome or GTK side, and you are in the US or the Americas, this July, Guadec is happening. I'm very excited about it.
What if you have a lot of money and you like to fly?
Yeah, that too. Yeah. It is technically a hybrid conference this year, so there will be remote presentations and everything will be live streamed. And of course, time zones are still a thing, so it can be hard. But everything will be recorded and live streamed. But if you can make it in person, as we were saying, I think that face-to-face, in-person communication and hanging out and doing the social stuff, I think is super valuable if you can swing it. Guadec is always my favorite time of year for open source.
Where's it happening this year, did you say?
It's happening in late July in Denver, Colorado, USA. So it's guadec.org. We'll take you to the
$1,600 for me to get there.
Oh. I mean, you're probably like worst case scenario. If you look at the globe, you're like literally opposite side of the globe.
I'm kind of worst case scenario. Like there's someone who invited me to come down to there's a developer conference in Brisbane later this year, and that's fine. I can get to Brisbane. That's a couple $100.
Yeah, you're like that's not flying literally around the world.
I consider there's some other stuff that happens in like Sydney. Like I can do Sydney. That works.
Yeah. Well, I've joked. I've said we need to make Guadec in more diverse locations. Like we need to have it in Australia one year. We need to have it in I don't know, the Philippines or something. Like you have it in South Africa. I don't know. Just like spread it out a bit more. But it is hard. It's like if you're not going to have all your regular contributors show up, then it limits the value of the event a bit. But yeah, if you can swing it, if you can make it in the US, and not you personally, Brody, if you're not gonna.
I'll definitely. I don't want to do it one year for sure. But yeah,
maybe when it's a little closer to home for you. But yeah, I highly recommend that if you're ever interested. It's a super fun time, and I'm helping organize it, so I'm biased there, of course. But yeah, and I will say if you were interested, I guess by the time this publishes, the call for papers is probably going to be closed.
Yeah, it'll be like mid-March.
So at this point, remote presentations will still be accepted through mid to late March, I believe. So after the GNOME 46 release. So if you wanted to give a presentation about something adjacent to GNOME and weren't able to do it in person, you can still submit your talk for a remote talk, and that'd be cool. We'd love to see you.
Awesome. Anything else you want to mention? Or is that it?
I think that's about it.
Awesome. As for me, I have my main channel, Brody Robertson. I do Linux videos there 6-ish days a week. Check it out, see what's over there. I got no idea at this point. I've got my gaming channel, that is Brody on Games. I'm definitely done with Neptunia by now. I don't know what my next game's gonna be. Might be God of War 2? I don't know, check it out. Might be Devil May Cry 4. See what's over there. I've got my React channel now, where if I decide to watch something on stream, I'll just clip it out and put it up. There's literally no effort there. If you want the most unscripted, rambly content you will ever find, where I will watch a 15-minute video and turn it into like 2 hours, go check that out. I think recently there should be a video that comes out about the Linux rap battle that happened a few years back, that someone sent me a clip. The thing, and I don't know if you saw this when it happened, but there was like a DistroTube challenge a bunch of Linux YouTubers to a rap battle. I'll send you some of them afterwards. They're really bad.
Fascinating.
And someone like 2 weeks ago released another one. It's like, here, I'm just better than all of you. And they were better than all of us.
Amazing.
The podcast, if you're listening to this, the audio release, it is on every video. No, audio release. Hold up. Video released on YouTube, Tech for Tea. If you're watching the video, you can find the audio any podcast platform. There is an RSS feed. I have too many things to talk about in the outro now. Yeah, the reaction channel is Brody Robertson Reacts. Temporarily, I might change the name. Anyway, what do you want to say? It's the end of the show. Give me final words.
Oh, geez. Let's see. Yeah. Remember that behind every username, there's a real person with real feelings.
How do we not say that throughout the entire show?
I don't know. But if you keep that in mind, it can help a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Catch you guys later.
Cheers.